My phone was buzzing incessantly on the glass table next to my lounge chair, the vibration a sharp contrast to the gentle rocking of the waves. I finally picked it up. It was my son, Mark. His voice was thin and laced with a frantic energy I hadn't heard in years. "Mom? Mom? Is that you? We just saw you on the news, on some kind of boat." The connection was crackling, but the disbelief was crystal clear. I took a slow sip of my chilled lemonade, watching the turquoise water glitter under the Caribbean sun. They had no idea that I wasn't just on the boat, I owned it. "You said there was no room for me in your minivan, remember?" I replied, my voice calm and even. "Funny, isn't it? On this boat, as you call it, I have room for 100 people, and yet I chose to come alone. How does a mother, deemed too much of a burden for a family road trip, end up on the deck of a private super yacht, making national headlines just a few weeks later?" To understand that, we have to go back to the phone call that shattered the last illusions I held about my own children. It had started, as these things often do, with a flicker of hope. For years, my late husband Robert and I had dreamed of taking our entire family, our 2 children, Mark and Sarah, and our 5 grandchildren, on a grand summer trip to the national parks. After Robert passed, the dream felt more important than ever. It was a way to keep his memory alive, to create one last, perfect family moment. I'd saved for it, planned for it, and spent countless nights looking at brochures, picturing the looks on my grandchildren's faces as they saw the mountains for the first time. I was the one who proposed it, offering to pay for the entire thing, the rental RV, the park fees, the food, everything. At first they seemed excited, but as the date grew closer, their calls became less frequent. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my daughter Sarah called. Her tone was the one she always used when she had to deliver bad news she didn't actually feel bad about, a sort of cheerful, dismissive pity. "Hey, Mom," she began, "about the trip. We all talked, and it's just not going to work with you coming along. The rental is a bit smaller than we thought, and with all the kids and their stuff, well, there's just no room." No room. The words hung in the air long after she'd said them. I didn't argue. I didn't plead my case or remind her that I was going to be paying for the very vehicle she claimed was too small. What was the point? I had spent a lifetime making myself smaller to accommodate my children. I'd given up my dream of going back to college so Mark could attend a private university. I'd drained my savings to help Sarah with a down payment on her house. I was the reliable, ever-present, endlessly sacrificing mother they could always count on and, it seemed, could just as easily cast aside when I became inconvenient. I just said, "Oh, I see. Well, you all have a wonderful time." My voice was quiet, hollow. Sarah, relieved that I hadn't made a scene, quickly chirped, "Oh, we will. And you know, it's probably for the best, Mom. All that hiking and the long drives, you'd have been exhausted. This way you can just relax at home." It was the classic excuse, repackaged as a kindness. They weren't excluding me, they were sparing me. They were painting my exclusion as an act of compassionate care, a narrative that made them the thoughtful children and me the frail, burdensome parent. After I hung up the phone, the silence of my house was deafening. The travel brochures were still fanned out on my coffee table, filled with pictures of smiling families standing before majestic mountains. It felt like a cruel joke. For 40 years, this house had been the center of our family's universe. It was where I'd hosted every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday. It was where I'd nursed them through fevers, helped them with homework, and listened to their heartbreaks. Now, it was just a quiet, empty space that they visited out of obligation. They had their own lives, their own families, their own plans. And in those plans, there was no room for me. For 2 days, I let the grief wash over me. I felt every bit the old, useless woman they saw me as. Then, on the 3rd morning, something shifted. I was going through my husband Robert's old desk, looking for a misplaced bill, when I found a small, locked metal box tucked away in the back of a drawer. Taped to the top was a yellowed envelope with my name on it, written in his familiar, steady hand. I had seen the box before, years ago, but he had simply patted my hand and said, "This is for a rainy day, sweetheart. I hope you never have to open it." Looking out the window at the gray, drizzling sky, I realized that the storm had finally arrived. The key was small and cold in my hand. It took me a moment to find the lock, my fingers trembling slightly. The box opened with a quiet click. Inside, there wasn't cash or jewelry, but a stack of papers and another, larger key with a numbered tag. On top of the papers was the letter from Robert. I unfolded it carefully, my heart aching as I saw his handwriting again. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, "if you are reading this, then the rainy day I feared has come. I love our children, but I was never blind. I saw how much you gave and how little they appreciated it. I saw how they expected you to be the constant, the rock, while they built their own worlds. I always worried they would forget the woman who gave them everything. I couldn't bear the thought of you being left alone, feeling like a burden." He went on to explain. Decades ago, he had taken a risk on a friend's little computer startup, investing a small amount of money we couldn't really spare at the time. He never told me the full extent of its success, choosing to keep it as a secret nest egg. "This is not their inheritance, Eleanor," he wrote in a firm, underlined script. "This is yours. This is your freedom. Go see the world. Live the life we talked about. Do not spend another day making yourself small for people who refuse to see your worth. They have their lives. Now you must live yours." The larger key was for a safe deposit box at the downtown bank. The next morning, I drove there in a daze, clutching the key and the letter. The bank manager led me into the vault, a place I'd never seen before, and left me in a small, private room. When he slid the long metal box out of the wall and placed it on the table, I held my breath. Inside were stacks of official-looking certificates, share documents for a company that was now a household name, one of the biggest tech giants in the world. There were also statements from a brokerage account I never knew existed, showing dividends being reinvested year after year, the number growing exponentially. I did some rough math, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the pen. The number had so many zeros I thought I'd miscalculated. It wasn't just a comfortable retirement, it was a fortune, enough to buy anything I wanted. And as I sat there in the silence of the vault, an idea began to form. It started not as revenge, but as a promise to Robert. I would see the world. But I wouldn't be doing it in a cramped RV. Leaving the bank, the world looked different. The gray, overcast sky I'd noticed earlier now seemed full of dramatic possibility. Robert's letter had been more than just a key to a fortune. It was a key to unlocking a part of myself I had kept hidden for decades. Eleanor the wife, Eleanor the mother, those roles had defined me. Now, for the first time, I was just Eleanor. And Eleanor had choices. My first call was not to a travel agent, but to a highly recommended wealth management firm. I walked into their gleaming downtown office the next day, a woman in a 10-year-old coat holding papers worth more than their entire building. I expected to be intimidated, but I wasn't. I calmly explained my situation, laid out the documents, and told the stunned advisor exactly what I wanted. A significant portion of the assets liquidated immediately, and a plan to ensure the rest would last not just my lifetime, but for generations, should I choose to leave a legacy. While the financial experts began their work, I began mine. I threw out the national park brochures. My dreams were bigger now, grander. I remembered a luxury magazine I'd flipped through at a salon once, filled with images of pristine white yachts sailing on impossibly blue water. That was the trip Robert would have wanted for me. No crowded RVs, no cramped quarters, just the sun, the sea, and absolute freedom. I contacted an exclusive yacht charter company. I didn't waver when they quoted the weekly price. I asked for their largest, most luxurious vessel, a full crew, a private chef, and a route through the quietest parts of the Caribbean. I wanted solitude and serenity. During that week of planning, Sarah called. I could hear the kids yelling in the background of what sounded like a cheap motel room. "Hey, Mom! Just checking in. It's an adventure," she said, her voice strained. "Are you doing okay? Not too lonely, I hope?" "I'm perfectly fine, dear," I said, looking over the specs for the yacht, named the Serenity. "I've been quite busy, actually, working on a new project." "Oh? That's nice," she replied, her interest already fading. I knew she was picturing me knitting a scarf or reorganizing the linen closet. "Well, gotta go. Talk soon." She had no idea my project involved a crew of 12 and a private helicopter pad. And as I finalized the payment, I smiled. The first part of my revenge wouldn't be loud or confrontational. It would be silent. It would be my complete and utter absence. The day I stepped onto the yacht was the first day of my new life. The captain, a distinguished man named George, greeted me with a respectful nod. The crew stood in a pristine line, addressing me as Madam. The vessel itself, the Serenity, wasn't just a boat. It was a floating palace of polished wood, gleaming brass, and cool white linen. As my luggage was whisked away to a master suite that was larger than the entire ground floor of my house, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was more than luxury. It was validation. For the first week, I did nothing but heal. I woke with the sun, not an alarm clock. I had coffee on my private balcony, watching dolphins race the bow. I read novels I'd meant to read for 20 years. The chef prepared exquisite meals, and I ate them on the deck, with the endless blue ocean as my only companion. I felt Robert's spirit there with me, a warm presence in the sea breeze. I was finally living the dream we had shared, and the guilt and sorrow that had weighed me down for so long began to lift. The event that changed everything happened on our 10th day at sea. We were cruising through a remote stretch of the Bahamas when the lookout spotted a small fishing boat, dead in the water and drifting helplessly. A family was on board, a husband, a wife, and their 2 young children looking terrified. Their engine had died days ago, their radio was broken, and they were out of food and water. Captain George handled the rescue with expert precision, and soon the grateful family was safely aboard my yacht. I made sure they were comfortable, giving them a guest suite and instructing the chef to prepare them a warm meal. The father, his eyes filled with tears of gratitude, told me he was a freelance photojournalist. He was so moved by the unsolicited kindness, by the sheer unexpectedness of being rescued by a vessel like mine, that he asked if he could document their story. When we docked in Nassau to drop them off, he had already contacted his agency. A local news affiliate, intrigued by the story of the guardian angel of the sea, asked for a brief interview. At first I refused. I wanted privacy. But then I thought of Mark and Sarah, somewhere on a dusty highway, complaining about the cramped quarters and cheap food. I thought of their casual cruelty, their dismissive tone, and I realized this was a perfect opportunity. I agreed to the interview on the condition that they only use my first name. The camera crew came aboard the next afternoon. As I sat on the deck with my magnificent yacht and the sparkling sea as my backdrop, I felt a calm, cold certainty. They would see this. They would finally see me. The news segment aired that evening. I watched it on the large screen in the yacht's main salon. They called me a benevolent mystery woman, showing breathtaking aerial shots of the Serenity cutting through the turquoise water. The interview portion was brief. I looked calm, content, and completely unrecognizable from the tired, heartbroken woman my children had dismissed a few weeks ago. When it was over, I simply turned off the television. I knew what was coming. I put my phone on silent, placed it face down on a table, and went to the upper deck to watch the sunset. For the first time, I didn't care what my children thought. I found out later, from a series of increasingly desperate voicemails, exactly what happened. They were all crammed into a dingy motel room just outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. The grand RV trip had been a nightmare. The kids were sick of the long drives. Mark and Sarah were arguing constantly about money, and the cheap vehicle they'd rented instead of the luxury one I'd offered had broken down twice. They were miserable, exhausted, and blaming each other. The motel television was on, droning out the sound of the kids fighting, and then my face appeared on the screen. Sarah apparently dropped a bowl of microwaved macaroni, splattering it across the stained carpet. They saw the yacht. They heard the reporter mention a vast personal fortune. They saw a mother they thought was sitting at home, knitting and feeling lonely, looking like a queen on her throne. That's when the first call came through, the one from Mark, the frantic, disbelieving one. After I calmly corrected him that it was a yacht, not a boat, and hung up, the deluge began. My phone, even on silent, began to light up like a strobe light. Dozens of calls from Mark, then from Sarah. The texts started flooding in. "Mom, pick up. We need to talk." "Where did you get that money? Did Dad have a secret life?" "We're having a terrible time out here. The van is a wreck. You could have helped us." And the one that truly revealed their nature. "We're your family. That money belongs to all of us. You have to share it." I read the messages with a strange sense of detachment. There was no anger, no apology, just pure, unadulterated greed. They didn't see me. They saw a walking, talking bank account they'd been locked out of. I looked at the flashing screen, then out at the endless, peaceful ocean. I called to Captain George. "Let's set sail for Antigua, shall we?" He smiled and nodded. As the yacht pulled away from the dock and back into the deep, beautiful darkness, I left the phone on the table, its frantic blinking a beacon from a world that I no longer belonged to.